Thank you all for coming. I feel like you're more relaxed than I am in this moment. So, thinking of tall tales and other stories, I'll start with this piece because that's probably the longest story. And of course, Ann touched on it a little bit, but I went to School of Visual Arts in New York City and I studied graphic design and illustration. I graduated from there in 1976 and pursued a career as an illustrator, which was not easy in the 70s for me. And by 1982, I lost the only job I ever had other than in high school was a computer graphics artist. And I was doing paintings, but I was not a neo-expressionist or graffiti artist, so I couldn't get a dealer. That was all they wanted to see me in Soho at the time. But I also couldn't afford paint and brushes and all that stuff. So I started making things out of found materials. I had a good friend who was an African art dealer, Lawrence Ramsey, and he and I would get together almost every night because we were the only guys who were up all night long. So in his studio, I would get to put on the Dan mask or blow the ivory horn. So I was feeling like I was in some sort of African spiritual exchange. So with that energy, I'm walking down Railroad Avenue, the service road, McCarter Highway in Newark, and I see an iron on the street run over by a car. And because I've been studying African art, I saw that iron as a Dan mask from Liberia. So I picked it up and put it in the studio, took a lot of Polaroids back in those years of it, had Polaroids all around me. And they began to talk to me little by little. And I guess maybe it's my personal belief system, but I started to believe I was involved in a spiritual or magical quest involving the irons. It started to give me information I guess to go back a little bit, one thing about the iron for me was when my parents divorced at 11 years old, I became the fix-it man. My dad fixed anything up to that time, broken irons, broken lamps, but now that was my job, but I didn't have the skill. So I'm talking about the 60s now. So when I'm in my studio in the 80s, I got a trunk full of steam irons, but they never really communicated to me the way they did once I found one on the street. So now I got all these irons, and I got a residency in New York Studio Museum in Harlem, but I couldn't, oops, I mixed up, the story is so old, I've got it confused. Everything that I just said happened when I got to residency. Before that, I was doing paintings and other sculptural projects. And so I started doing the scorch of iron stuff in the residency at Studio Museum in Harlem. Going to all the thrift stores in Harlem, getting irons, finding irons on the street. But I was also at that time reading the works of Joseph Campbell, comparative mythology. And I decided that I would create my own mythology around the steam iron. So I looked at the fact that my great-grandmother worked as a domestic up to the day she died. She died in 1994 at 100 years old. But she had been old my whole life, and she had ironed and everything. And I was an ironer too because I went to high school in the 60s when Motown was big. So we had to go to school dressed like the Temptations. Perfectly ironed shirt and pants and shiny shoes. And just as an aside, I had an uncle who lived with us who was much older but had a great wardrobe. So I'd heard of all of his clothes. So I'm like this tall, wearing a grown man's purple shadow striped pants and purple roll collar shirt and hat. It was insane. But so yeah, she was she ironed, she laundered, she did everything for this one family most of my life. So I began to use her experience to help me process what this iron was really about. I also used a speech by Malcolm X called The House Negro and the Field Negro, where Malcolm says the house Negro loved the master more than the master loved himself. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" It just goes on and on from there. So I began to say, okay, so domestic workers were the house Negroes. So my great-grandmother was a house Negro. My great-grandfather was a preacher, so that's kind of house in evolution, because they became the political leaders after a while. So those things led me to begin to explore the whole post-slavery antebellum period, using the steam iron as a symbol. was also inspired by the fact that the 80s was a year where branding as a term became a big thing. Like my son, he only wore Fila. In his room, he had Fila t-shirts on the walls and Fila sneakers lined up. So I was hooked on double entendres to this day, so brand became brand. So as I began to understand, read, and release more from my personal genetic memory about the slave trade and post-slavery, I began to see the iron as a symbol for all those times. In the beginning, the iron was pointing down, it was a mass, because the point is a chin. And that was the first one I found. I've done some of the iron pointing up where it becomes a house. I put the flat end of two irons together like this, and it becomes a slave ship, like a boat. So it just went on and on and on for many years. And once New York saw me as the Willie the Scorch, I decided to hold on to that stuff for a long time. And I think probably from 1988 to probably 2000 or 1999, it was my dominant iconography. So of course, if you're using an iron, you got to think about the ironing board too. So the ironing board came into play because this also could be a slave ship. And in fact, I did it until 1999, because in 99 I did a piece called Stowage. It was a woodblock print, and it had the iron board in the middle, and it had the scorches. Actually, it's a print, but they had the irons all around. That was me beginning to see each iron brand as a tribe. So the tribe was Proctor Silex, Sunbeam, GE, Black & Decker. So each scorch represents a different tribe. And it just kind of grew from there. So, this piece is kind of a throwback, because when I made these pieces in 1988 and 89, I didn't think about conservation. I don't think about that most time when I work. But now, so 20 years later, some museum says, oh, we have one of your iron boards, but the scorches are falling off. And in my mind, I'm saying, you purchased brown cloth, man, what do you expect? But I didn't say it out loud. So the gallery gives me the piece back to make a repair in this year, is that 2001 maybe, or 2020. And so as I make the repair, I said, I got my fires already hot, these irons are all hot, I might as well make more of them. So I began to make a few extra ones for the gallery. But I tried to resolve the issue of the scorches getting hot over time and falling off by putting resin and wax all over the surface. I also use this symbol more like a crown for two reasons. One reason is, just like in pop music and visual arts, people respond to quotes. Like you could be listening to a jazz piece by John Coltrane, and then you'll hear somebody in the solo quote the song. So here I'm quoting the concept of the crown, which was by our Lord and Savior, Jean-Michel Basquiat, because I feel that Basquiat died for our careers, the same way Jesus died for our sins. In Soho, once Basquiat died, every gallery wanted one black artist. So in my gallery, I'm still that one. So that's why I give Basquiat those props. So this was getting out of suffering, getting out of antebellum and moving more contemporary to a symbol that was more powerful. So that's that one. This one here is, I haven't seen this since 1990. But as I said, I had been an illustrator mostly. I did romance covers for Fawcett Book Publishers. I did album covers for Savoy Records. And I was a master of low-budget graphic design in New Jersey. Master of low-budget graphic design. And so I had my clients for New Jersey Opera, New Jersey Ballet, people like that. But as I said, I was running out of money, couldn't afford paint and canvas and stuff like that. And I should say, in this period, I thought of myself as an archaeological ethnographic Dadaist. Because I would go to any neighborhood in Newark where there had been a fire, and I would always find human evidence. I always find an iron board and a steam iron. Turning it into what I do, took it to the Dada level. In this period, I was a minimal maximalist, which I pretty much still am today, taking a single object and multiplying it to make something. So in the period where I had no money for brushes and paint and canvas, I'm walking down the street because I started making jewelry out of small rusty things. So I walked down the street, picking up little wire shoes, putting them in my pocket, and not looking ahead, but walking the whole time like this. And I ended up in this factory courtyard, abandoned factory building with homeless people living inside. I'm just walking up the steps like I'm in a shopping mall. So I go in that place, and on the second floor, I find like probably 500 hair dryers. You know, they were all unused, but the building had been abandoned for many decades and had fires in it. Some of them had parts that were melted off, all that stuff. So I got the energy from the homeless folks. I said, well, I'm gonna get a shopping cart and I'm gonna get all these dryers out. It was only like 2 blocks from my studio. So I got all the hair dryers and brought them back to my studio in Newark, and I began to make sculpture with them, but I couldn't make something that was a full figure standing. And I think this summer I visited Cancun and all the ruins and all that stuff too. So I was kind of inspired by that aesthetic. And that's how this came about. So we did is one hair dryer, front side, back side, repeated to make this composition. And when I did this, I think I did probably 8 of them all at the same time. I like to work that way. So if you get lost in one part, thinking you know what you're doing, which is not a good thing to do for me as an artist, I don't want to know what I'm doing. I want to know I'm open to let things be done through me. So while doing this one, I had 7 other ones. So if I felt myself like too confident, I'd move on to the next one and keep it going. And so minimal maximalism means using one object obsessively.
Is this a block print?
No, this is 1980, 1990 rather. This is Xerox's cut out. The background is, I photographed the hairdryer on the ground, so all the background is the background from the photograph.
Okay.
I actually still have the original photograph. But because of Joseph Campbell in those years and Lawrence Ramsey and African art, I became very interested in the primitive aesthetics of things. Even some of my work today, I take a primitive approach in the way I put it together.
So is that a collage?
It's a collage.
It's a collage.
A 1990 collage with, I think I went to an unsloppy copy in the village. I've got 200 copies of this hairdryer photograph.
And that background, is that charcoal drawing?
No, this is the background of the photograph of the hairdryer. I opened the hairdryer in 2 halves and laid it flat on the cement
On the cement, so that's cement.
and photographed it, yes.
That's an image of cement.
Yeah, but I guess Xeroxing was not quite what copying is today. So it's a little different.
Do you still have the hair dryers?
I wish I did, you know. The first piece that I made was called, who was that flew too close to the sun?
Icarus.
Icarus, it was called Icarus. I made a pair of wings and showed them at Artist Space in New York in the 80s, in the 90s, in the early 90s. And I also made a lot of masks out of hair dryers. I showed them at PS1 back in the 90s. The masks sold, and that's a whole other story because they sold and never got paid. They sold in Switzerland. But the piece that was Icarus, I still had it for many years. But it was huge, it was hard to store, so I actually took it apart and threw the hair dryers away. And I regret that to this day. As a result of that experience, now most of my studio is just a junkyard, so I'm throwing it away. I want to use the material until I run out of it. Like currently, I probably have like 2 million high heel shoes. I haven't been looking at high heels in 2 years. And I still have all my irons from the 80s too. So you want to come back to this stuff, or the stuff will come back to you, one or the other. So is that a cool story, or should I go to questions now? Or?
Sure, if you want to.
Here we go. True story. True stories.
I have a silly question just about process. What adhesive? Because I've seen collages and some of them that are really old that are falling apart and disintegrating, and that is
Rubber
not.
cement.
Well, this is acid-free jade glue.
Jade glue.
I think jade is the brand name. I forgot it too until I saw the piece today. I said, oh yeah, that's how we did that.
It's real
Can
tight.
you talk about growing up in New York and what that offered you in terms of culture of the
Yes.
city and
Yes.
people and institutions.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be in Newark during the Cultural Revolution when Amiri Baraka, or AKA Leroy Jones, first came to Newark. I was in middle school. And I tell people that he changed us all from Negroes to black. Because through Baraka, after Baraka, everybody was wearing dashikis, and a lot of us had African names suddenly. So I got that from Newark. My experience in Newark was just, I would say, call it a blackening, I guess. In Newark, I mean, I was born in the suburbs in Somerville, New Jersey, and I went there every weekend to visit my grandparents. But I pretty much lived in the projects in Newark until about 1967. The year of the riots, I was in California, so I missed that, but I saw it on TV. I got home, I was surprised that my parents hadn't gotten anything. Everybody was at robbing stores, getting new TVs with my folks. Didn't get anything. But yes, and Newark was also, Baraka was a writer. He was also a painter, but also a writer. And in Newark at that time, there were lots of writers. So in high school, at Arts High School in Newark, which is right down the block from Amiri Baraka's place, called the Committee for Unified Newark, you know, we had a good cultural exchange and a good exposure to African culture. He had a troupe of dancers called the Boot Dancers that would come and do the South African blah, blah, blah kind of dance. Just amazing experience. I got to be in one of his plays. But there was also Freddie Roach in town back in those years who had a play called Soul Pieces, and I became his assistant. He had the Kruger Mansion in Newark for a little while, and I would go there and pretty much help him straighten up and renovate and just talk about art. So I think Newark offered a lot. I mean, in the latter years, like in these years, Newark offered me a lot of stuff on the street that I could make art out of. Like for many years, I didn't buy a steamer, I just walked down the street and I would find one. It got to the point after a while that when I moved to where I live now, there was nothing on the street. So I started going to thrift stores and buying things. But Newark was an amazing place in the 60s and 70s. So for me, it's mostly about the 50s and 60s in Newark with the jazz clubs. There was a jazz club down the street from Arch High, Sparky J's. I would go there every weekend. I was too young to drink, so I didn't always get in. But I was down to the music, and I've seen a lot of great musicians there. I had one year I actually got to be in a jam session there, because I had tangent stories now. I had a friend who was a saxophone player, and I love music. I played the guitar, but my friend, because he had played a horn, inspired me to, play a wind instrument. So I started playing the flute. We went to Jazzmobile in Harlem, which is a summer music program that teaches jazz. Went there for 2 years. It was great for me. I had Curtis Fuller as my theory teacher. He was John Coltrane's only trombonist. I had Mario Rivera for rhythm training. So it was a great experience. So with that, not with the ability, but with that pedigree, I go to Sparky Days for a jam session. And it was, it's like everybody's cooking, then it's my turn, and I just play like, and then I stopped. They said, no, keep going. But it was a great experience. And I got that from being in Newark.
You still play the flute?
I still have a flute, but I'm really hooked on the guitar these days. I have 4 kids, and so as a result, they're all grown out of the house, but I got an instrument still. So I got a bass guitar, I got a flute, I got a trumpet, I have a drum set, and I have 2 pianos. And these are just all toys for me. But currently the main toys have been the guitar, because I studied classical guitar about 10 years ago. And I'm still working to master some of those songs.
Didn't Baraka have an open house, a blue?
Yeah, he had a club in his house. It was called Blue Arc, maybe.
Blue something, yeah.
I never went to the club. I've been to the house. Yes. He and I did a collaboration at what's it called? The new concert hall in Newark. I think it's called New Jersey Pack. Yes. We did a tribute to Willie the Lion Smith, who was a jazz pianist. I did the set design, which was just a giant inflatable balloon of Willie the Lion Smith playing the piano. But it was it's taller than this ceiling. And Baraka and one of his friends, Halim Suleiman, they just dressed in tuxedos that recited their stuff in front of my sculpture.
Cool.
Yes.
What do you think might have stopped Newark from continuing to be a jazz city, other than, you know, WBGO, which is,
Right.
I think, the most important jazz station in the world, but
Mhm.
like the clubs, you know what I mean, the
Yeah,
culture.
You know, that's a good question, and I don't know what that answer might be. If I just gave you an off the cuff opinion, I would say just New York.
Yeah, they all moved to New York.
Yeah, which is hard to hold your status when you're next to a lion, even though the lion is your twin. But New York is more attractive to people.
Would you also say that this story of Newark is such a wonderful city, still a wonderful city, but this same story of the disappearance of the jazz clubs and things like that, that happened in LA, it happened in
Yeah.
San Francisco, it happened in Detroit, it happens in Chicago. So that's why I'm like pushing, we gotta go beyond the conversation to see, you know, it's like if you got cancer, where's the problem coming from?
Right,
You know,
right.
and we live in this capitalist society, and it's about who's gonna bring in the dollar. You know,
Right.
and that's, I won't say it's the whole story, but it's part of the story, because these cities like Newark were great black meccas of culture that influenced American culture. Because you can't talk about American culture if you don't talk about black people. You know? So that's where the African part comes in.
Yeah, well, what you said inspires me to want to open a jazz club in Newark.
Yeah,
I used to
yeah.
run a gallery in Newark called the Works Gallery.
Mm.
I forget what my years were, but we would have a lot of music there, live music, because I have a lot of friends who are musicians.
Talk about when you had your loft in Norfolk, the Carter Highway, and the things that you had happening there.
Yes, yes. Now, I got out of college in '76. I've worked as a freelance illustrator for 1 year. Then I moved to California thinking I was going to be a writer, because I also like to write plays and stuff, which I got from Baraka. But I didn't have any success in LA because I didn't know how to pursue it. I didn't have a typewriter. All my stuff was written longhand. So I came back to Newark in '78, but then I was offered a job at the University of Delaware in the theater department. So I moved there for 1 year. And then I came back to Newark and I found this loft in the Ironbound in Newark with 3,000 square feet. I only paid $250 a month. That was good. And I didn't know, I knew I wanted to be a so-called studio artist. I didn't know the process. And a friend of mine, another artist named Bisa Washington, she said to me, if you want to be an artist, you got to have a gallery. Now, she meant to say, if you want to be an artist, you should try to find a dealer. But she said gallery, so I said, okay, I'm gonna start a gallery. So 2/3 of my loft became a public space. And for me, now these years later, I think of it as graduate school for me, because I was not a fine art major. But I showed the greatest fine art majors in New Jersey in that gallery, and heard them talk about their work and studied their work. And it was like an education for me. I think I did it for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then I finally got a real art dealer in New York, Jackie Littlejohn. She was on Green Street in the '70s. So I let my board of directors run the gallery. Now, yeah, we were a nonprofit, but we never got any grants from anybody. I had a friend, I went to Boston University also, so I had a friend who was a DJ from BU. So I let him have a place to give big parties to raise money. I mean, it was only $250, but we need extra money for good things too. So I started the Works Gallery and taught classes in herbology, because I was also a frequent student at the Tree of Life bookstore in Harlem, which is no longer there, right? It's torn down. So I studied herbology there with Dr. John Moore, and so many great classes I took over the years on religion and culture. So I brought that same concept to the Works Gallery. I had some of the same people come there and teach classes. It was just a great time. And I still had a 9 to 5, actually it was a 10 to 10 job, 4 days a week doing computer graphics at that time. But when I would come home from work at 10 in the morning and walk up the steps, I would feel like I was walking into a temple because I had always grew up in apartments. But now I had 3,000 square feet and a bunch of skylights and windows all around. It was just such a beautiful experience for me that it was life changing. And I stayed there until 1993. But it was no longer a gallery, it was just my studio there. I would commute from where I live now to come in and work every day. Now, talking about Newark, Mr. Jones, the African dance class at Boss, that was a definitely growing experience for everybody in Newark. A lot of the artists would show up for African dance. And it was every Sunday, there'd be vendors there, things that offer you knowledge. I also say that in Newark and through the African dance class, I learned a lot more about African culture and religion. And that informed a lot of these pieces after a while. Like this proctosolic iron, which is, this same iron, proctosolic iron. I started to see it as something totally different that would freak me out for many years. I'm not gonna tell you what it was, but it was all my interest and awareness in African religion. That iron became to talking about it. I said this was a spiritual experience because despite what was going on inside my head, I had been living in that loft for 10 years before I did these pieces. And I never noticed scorches on the floor of my studio before. But I started seeing scorches on the floor of my studio. So I said, okay, so this really is magic. And I just kept it going to brand myself. So,
What keeps you occupied these days?
Well, occupied is a vague word. Should I choose my definition?
Choose your own.
Okay. Well, in the fine art world right now, I am making chandeliers out of plastic water bottles, but they're all commission pieces. I don't show them in galleries, but the first water bottle shows at a museum in New Jersey. So since then, I've been getting opportunities, commissions to do things. So I'm doing that 2 days a week. Currently, I'm doing it every day for a couple hours because I have an opportunity in New York on Park Avenue to install chandeliers along Park Avenue. As many as I want, which I've only committed to 2, but I'm working to do 4. 69th Street and 7th Street in the median there.
How big are
Well, they'll be 10 feet long and 6 feet wide. They'll be hanging from 12 feet. So you'll approach it, it'll be like a person in front of you this big. So,
When is that? When?
mucho dinero. The armature's costing me $300 to make each armature because they don't want me to put anything in the ground. It's been hanging over a 20 by 20 foot bed of marigolds and can't put anything in the ground. So I gotta work with the perimeter and I need something that comes up and turns like a cantilever arm to hang from. So $3,000 for the materials for each one.
It's gonna be magic.
But I'm gonna do 4 of them. Yeah, this can be an amazing piece. I'm looking forward to it.
When is that for?
It's for the summer and the fall. I plan to install them on May 15th. They have you install like at 3 or 4 o'clock a.m. before the city's awake, supposedly. So that's one thing I put my time on. Also, I'm working to learn, what's it called, Spanish Romance, and also Chopin Nocturne 20 on the guitar. So, but the sheet music is like, sometimes it's hypnotic. So I'm looking at videos on YouTube to learn these songs. And I'm learning them much faster. I have them recorded. I put them in my truck when I'm driving, so I hear them over and over again. Because I've always mostly played by ear, even though I did study classical guitar and I've had piano lessons and all that, but the sound is what gets me.
Who do you listen to?
Piano-wise?
Yeah, like for those pieces.
I got, I don't know the performer's name, but it's not, any of the big names. No. It's just that I said Siri, and I chose the ones that sound the best to me.
Okay, so we're ready for the panel. Take a couple minutes and then.
You have 2 more more stools, or are we
Hey,
gonna
I'm
share
gonna
this
get you
one? Boston and came back. Boston
Take my seat, I'm just gonna review the rest of it.
Gonna what?